One of the great skills we can learn in any language is how to ask good questions. This is something I'm going to present to you in this course that we have built together called English at Work. Basically, it's for how we use English in our career. So turning to our material, we can see here we have our course available. And if we look at one of the courses inside it, so it is the art of strategic questioning in negotiations. So this is how we can ask questions with a certain strategy in mind, rather than just going with the flow. So let's jump in and see what some of the elements in this course is all about. So in order to get an understanding of why questioning is so important, I'd like you to consider the following quote from Voltaire. Judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. It's a really nice quote, and I think there's a lot of value in this. We really can discover so much just by changing how we ask questions. And this is what we want to do in this course. So let's go on further and check what are some of the ways we can do this. In order to see what is the difference between questions and question types, let's begin by dividing our question types into two basic categories: open questions and closed questions. Open questions are going to start with the question words who, why, what, where, when. Closed questions are any questions that start with a verb: is, will, can, have, for example. Being able to identify these questions is part of this skill of being able to ask questions strategically. So it's not enough just to know this. We have to develop the skill of changing from one question style to the other style so that we can have a strategy in mind. So we have to be able to switch from one question type to the other, from closed questions to open questions. In this way, we can generate a strategy about what outcome we would wish to achieve. So let's go more deeply into the open questions. So, for example, we can see that the open questions start with who, what, where, when, and how. So if we take the example context of a technology procurement negotiation, we can see that all the questions that are listed here are open questions. Basically, they start with who, what, where. What this does is it opens up the discussion and it encourages new details to emerge. This is really important at the start of negotiation, to make sure that we get as much information as possible and that our partner perceives the environment as being open and as a good, positive negotiating atmosphere. Switching then to the closed questions, we're going to be hearing a yes/no response. Typically, we don't want this at the start of a negotiation. This is more towards the end of a negotiation when we're trying to focus down the result to a specific outcome. So a typical example would be in service contract negotiation. We want to change some of the details about the service contract. So for example, we can see that all of the sentences here are starting with verbs. Can you provide 24/7 support? Is next quarter's rollout achievable? Would you consider a monthly payment structure? All these questions, because they start with a verb, are focusing on commitment and on details. An important thing to notice is that we must develop the ability to switch from both question types, depending on where we are in the negotiation and what outcome we would like to achieve. So if we want to keep things open and create more solutions, we would choose the open questions, starting with who, how, what, where. If we want to focus on results and steering the conversation to decisions, we will start with closed questions and using verbs at the start of our question. So in order to practice this skill, what we want to do is start with closed questions and change them into open. So for example, we've got some exercises here. closed question starts with the verb will. Will you include free training in the package? The idea of this exercise is to generate from oneself the response. Obviously, if I click on the open here, I get an example. But the idea is that I begin to just use one of the question words and automatically build up my skill in generating this response. So for example, if I'm at the start of a negotiation and I really want an open question, however, in my mind, what comes across is, will you include free training? That's what I want to know. That's what I really want. I want to create the discipline in myself and the ability in myself to not start with will, but to start with how or what. So I could ask the question, instead of saying, will you include free training? I could say, how will the training be delivered? It doesn't necessarily mention free training, but it gets the conversation started on the important points for my partner in terms of the training. So for example, here, the sample sentence, how can we incorporate training into the package? So these are some of the possibilities. We could also ask, where will training happen in the delivery of the product? So looking at the next closed sentence, we can see here, can you agree to a 3-month deadline? This is something maybe that comes to our mind, and we want to make sure that we get our point across to agree to a 3-month deadline. So therefore, the first thing that comes to our mind is, can you do it or not? Yes or no? But again, if we're at the start of our negotiation, what we want to do is create this open environment, and we want details at the start of a negotiation. We want as much details and information as possible. So instead of starting with the, can you agree to a 3-month deadline? I could use, what are some of the issues in delivering a 3-month deadline? How ready are you to deliver this in a 3-month deadline? What are some of the main blockers that typically arrive in such a short deadline period? All these questions allow the other partner to get more information, to give us more information. And this is basically what we want at the start, definitely the start of the negotiation. So again, as we're going through these, we can obviously look at what equivalent would be in the open question, what factors might influence your ability to meet a 3-month deadline. When we're doing the exercise, what we should do is focus on not just reading what the open question should be, but ourselves trying to arrive at an articulation of an open question from a closed one. Moving on then, we want to look at the differences between open and closed questions, what outcome these produce. So this is a time just to reflect a little bit more, to deepen our understanding of open and closed questions. Once we appreciate it, once we get an understanding of how important they are and what conclusions and what results they can bring us, the more we begin to value our own ability to switch between the two and to use them strategically. So this exercise takes the example of a software development project. If we ask the following 2 questions, what would the difference be in the outcome? So for example, if I ask an open question, I'm starting with what, not a verb. I'm not starting with what. What challenges do you foresee in meeting our desired delivery date? The closed question is, can you commit to delivering by August the 1st? During our sessions, one of the things we would do is talk about this. And this is something you can do yourself also. You can type or transcribe your response. Use the questions that are there just to stimulate your own understanding of what is important and what is significant in using an open one and what is significant in using a closed one. Ask yourself, when would you use the open question versus the closed one? And how could the open question uncover underlying issues that the closed question might overlook? So basically, what will the open question discover that the closed question will not discover? As usual, all your responses can be saved here. The next exercise again is to encourage us just to think more deeply and to place this strategy in different circumstances. Basically, the task here is to decide, should I use an open one or should I use a closed one in this situation? So for example, in the first one, you're negotiating a partnership with a vendor who seems hesitant. What would the value of using an open one be? What would the value of using a closed one be? the other party is avoiding specific details about pricing, what should our approach be in that situation? And the third one, a client has expressed concerns about delivery speed. How can we structure our dialogue with them so that we get a desirable outcome and we can see the difficulties that they have in relation to delivery speed? So our next set of exercises revolve on question progression techniques. It's basically how do we build up our questions as we're in the middle of a negotiation. The first exercise there then is to transform deal breakers that happen in a negotiation into more opportunity open questions. And so here you see a list of typical kind of deal breaking situations that you might feel that you need to say in a particular negotiation. This is fine if you do want to break the deal, but often we don't necessarily need to do that. And we might achieve more by leaving these occasions open. The first one, is this your final price? If there is a resistance around this, we want to try and generate a better question. Again, we can formulate this ourselves. We can practice formulating it. If we click on this, we're going to get a solution, but we want to experience first our own ability to generate an open question from this closed one. So this question, if we recognize it and break it down, starts with a verb, so we know it is a closed question. It starts with is a verb, and so then therefore we know it's closed. So how can we change this? And we see here is they use maybe what? What factors determine your pricing structure? So we've changed from talking about the final price to talking about the pricing structure. It takes the pressure off moving to the final price, but keeps the discussion on price. Later on, we're also going to get why these suggestions are better. Are these free cost overruns your fault? Right, very accusatory. A better effort might be when something goes wrong is what factors contributed towards the changes in the project costs. So focusing from someone's fault into what actually caused what factors caused the increase in costs. And why is it better? Because it focuses on understanding causes rather than assigning blame. Obviously, if we've got time to think about this, it makes sense and it seems very obvious. But when we're in the situation itself, it can be difficult to always be able to change from a closed to an open question. So this is why we want to practice it. It makes it become fluent for us and easier to do, especially if we're under stress. Another great exercise to do is the following, is the question response strategy. And basically it focuses around when someone asks us a question, how can we respond? Especially if it puts us at a disadvantage or a situation that we don't want to be in. The examples here are basically the question, a difficult question that we don't really want to answer and we want to redirect in a different way. If someone is saying this to you, you want to kind of practice how can I respond to that? What's your maximum budget? Maybe you could respond this way. How comprehensive a solution are you looking for? So it started off with trying to focus down on our budget, and we changed it, well, the budget depends on what solution you want. So it gets the other partner focusing on and giving you answers to what they really need in a solution. Can you improve the warranty? This is very direct and leads us to a direct yes and no, and maybe it might be difficult for us to deliver a no in that situation, or it might be compromising if we say yes. So we might need to dig further. And then we change from the verb starting to our WH questions. Which aspects of the courage concern you the most? Responding to these, trying to generate your own responses to these. Use the suggestion here, right, that we get by just clicking on the sentence. Use that suggestion to help you formulate new ones. But we don't want to just learn the suggested sentences here. We want to practice the ability to generate these ourselves, using the sample one as a model. So I'll invite you to do that. It's a great exercise and it's something I often do with students in class. Another great exercise that I like to do, and it's good to practice even on your own, is at the very early stage, have in mind a concept of you're gathering information. Rather than focus on getting an agreement, focused the collaboration on information gathering. And one of the ways you can do that is by using a phrase which is what sort of, or what kind of. This is a very useful initial question. So for example, in technology project, what sort of integration timeline are you envisaging? What sort of internal resources can you dedicate? As long as we start with what sort of, and then think of all the elements that are important for you and maybe for your clients in a service agreement. So then we could ask, what sort of support levels do you typically require? Rather than starting off with saying, here are the support levels we offer, change the focus by using what kind of, what sort of, what level of support do you normally require? Another important issue for some companies is response time. Depending on the company, response time can be a really important deal maker. So if I know that response time is important for my client, I'm going to prepare sentences with what sort of response time are you expecting? If we're working with product development, again, I will look at my client and pick out the important aspects of product development. And what I can do then is use the same phrase. What sort of specifications are essential? If quality assurance is important for this client, then I can use quality assurance and what sort of in the same sentence and just link them together. What sort of quality assurance processes do you prefer? In addition with that, we can also look at the language of approximation. So using this early on in the negotiation is a very good way to open things up, to make room for reducing and increasing certain aspects of our offer. Approximation is all about using phrases like somewhere around, in the region of, approximately, roughly, about, around. This allows the client to actually say where exactly they have priorities and they have requirements. And it allows us to focus on their needs and get a better picture of the numbers that are important to them. So continuing on with the exercises, this is going into the advanced level. I'd invite you to take a look at that as well. And it's focusing on grammar structures. What grammar structures can we use and incorporate into our negotiation, and what results this can bring us? So for example, our conditions, using what if and suppose to explore possibilities without commitment. And this is our typical second conditional, which you might have heard in grammar classes. But if we begin to think of it rather than just the second conditional, but more so how to plant an idea without asking the other partner to commit, but to plant an idea in their mind so that they can begin to experience it. If with the past tense and then using would and the verb. So this structure is, we can see in these two practice scenarios. Suppose we increased, past tense of increase, the order volume by 30, and then how would that affect? Using would and their verb affect the unit price. Or even more simply, what if we committed, past tense, to a 2-year contract, even leaving it open with no would? This structure, suppose or what if, with the simple past, is talking about an imaginary situation, and therefore it's more suggestive to our partner, and then therefore it's an idea that they can work with and they can consider if it is applicable to them. Then continuing on, we've got context-specific question chains and working on those, and we've got some advanced response techniques, and again the approximation, how to use approximation in negotiation, and some exercises about that. So I'd invite you to take a look at these different exercises and experiment with them. And we also have a section just on negotiation pressure points. When you're under pressure with many different scenarios, right? When you've got a budget constraint, when you've got timeline pressure, when you've got quality concerns, if there's an aggressive volume demand, which often happens in negotiation and in project management, what would be some of the solutions that we could have at hand, just to be ready for those. So this practice on specific pressure points is also a great skill to develop the ability to apply all these different techniques. So looking forward to seeing you in the lessons and to discover these techniques a bit more and to apply them more to our lives, to apply them more so in our career and to feel that we can use them in English comfortably. Thank you all very much for listening. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next classes.